Hi everyone, welcome back to the Be Kind, Be Happy story time. And for today's episode, I'll be continuing with Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. So, just to quickly summarize where we're up to so far, we've already covered the first 6 chapters, which basically builds it up to the 7th chapter. Why? Is because the first chapter talks about the background of Neng, the Sixth Patriarch. The second goes straight into prajñā, which is wisdom, which is what he enlightened to and what is the right view of the fundamental nature, self-nature, putting directly to the self-nature. And this is why this is called the sudden teaching. Number 3 goes into the questions. So basically using real right view, using the prajñā to answer questions from the assembly, questions of Amitabha Buddha, questions of the Pure Land practice, questions of the interchange between Emperor Wu and the Bodhidharma, and questions about blessings and merits and its differentiations. Chapter 4 was about meditation and wisdom. So now it's bringing meditation into the context of wisdom to talk about how they are not two separate things and that they are one and one of the same. The next chapter, chapter 5, was specifically about seated meditation. And then chapter 6, which is just the previous chapter, was about the repentance. So this is beyond just repenting, but also talking about vowing to not conduct those wrong deeds in the future, but also talking about the 4 great vows, which is the vows within oneself, and then the 3 refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, within oneself. So this sutra so far has been focused about the self-nature and not so much dwelling on dualistic practices in terms of what is good and bad, right and wrong, what is the things that we do. This is just purely pointing to the self-nature by identifying right view, which is wisdom, which is prajñā. So now we talk about encounters. So this is how Venerable Master Neng was able to disseminate his teachings across so many different exchanges with different people and with their problems, and how he was able to encounter each and every one of these problems. Very interesting. This is basically like a chapter on the mini stories of Neng when he was throughout his life. So let's get started. Chapter 7, Encounters. After attaining the Dharma in Huangmei, the master Neng returned to Cao Ho village in Zhaozhou, where no one knew him. Another text says, when the master left, he went to Cao Ho village, where he stayed more than 9 months. The master then said to himself, in less than 30 days or so, I will go to Huangmei. This would be the utmost in seeking the way. How could I hesitate? The time of his going, as given in other text, is incorrect. So these are like basically 2 different translations of the original text, which was in Sanskrit. And so they had 2 different translations. But I guess this is still just building the context, the framing of the chapter. So it's not that important. There was a Confucius scholar named Liu Zilue, whose Raishu propriety was profound. Zilue had an aunt who was a nun named Wu Jinzang. Wu Jinzang is actually a very interesting word. Wu Jin means immeasurable, inexhaustible, and then Zhang means treasure. So her name translates to immeasurable, inexhaustible treasury. And the nun who constantly recited the Great Nirvana Sutra, when the master heard it for a bit, he understood its wondrous meaning and explained it for her. So this is very interesting, and this talks about when someone of great wisdom, like when someone of great wisdom like Neng hears some texts, he will be able to immediately understand its meaning without having to read the entire text. And this is demonstrated several times in this chapter. So the nun who was holding the text asking about a word, and the master said, I cannot read the words, but if you ask me about the meaning, the nun said, if you do not read the words, how can you understand the meaning? The master said, the wondrous principle of the Buddhas have nothing to do with words. The nun was amazed and informed the village elders, this is a man in possession of the way. You would do well to ask to make offerings to him. So immediately the nun, who was a practitioner herself, was able to immediately identify that Neng was in possession of the way. He understood the path. He understood the fundamental nature of the teachings. There was a great-great-grandson of the Wei dynasty. So now this is the second chapter. So now this is the second encounter. So the first encounter basically talks about how he was able to understand Buddhist texts, profound ones such as the Great Nirvana Sutra. This is one of the great sutras that the Buddha expounded right before he died. So this was like a summarization of his entire life teachings in one sutra. Very profound sutra. And so he was able to understand the meaning of the Buddhist texts without even being able to read words, because he was illiterate, because he was, during his upbringing, he didn't have much education because of coming from a poor background. Second encounter, there was a great-great-grandson of the Wei dynasty, martial lord Cao Cao, named Cao Shu Liang, who, along with the local residents, strove to come do obeisance to the master. At that time, the old Baoling monastery was in ruins, having been burned by soldiers at the end of the Sui dynasty. A new monastery was built once again on the old foundation. The master was invited to reside there, and he suddenly turned it into an abode of the treasure of the teaching. The master stayed there for more than 9 months, when he was once again pursued by an evil mob. The master escaped to the mountain in front of the monastery, and the mob set fire to the forest to force him out. The master escaped by hiding in the rocks, and the rocks now show the marks of his knees and the design of his robe where he sat in the lotus position. Because of this, the spot is called Escape Rock. The master remembered the Fifth Patriarch's prediction that he should stop and hide upon encountering sympathy from a group, and he hid in 2 hamlets. The monk Fa Hai was from Chujiang in Shaozhou. When he went, so now this is a third encounter. I guess the second encounter was to highlight how when he was being chased away, he was able to just merely escape death after the monastery was burnt to the ground. And there he made the rock famous because he was so devout in his surrendering, or I guess so clever in his escape, that the rock now shows the marks of his knees and the design of his robe. And the rock is now called Escape Rock. Another story, the monk Fa Hai, this is a good one. The monk Fa Hai was from Chujiang in Shaozhou. When he first went to study under the patriarch, he asked, "The mind is Buddha. Please favor me with your instructions." The master said, "For the preceding thought not to be generated in mind, and for the succeeding thought not to be extinguished, is Buddha. That which creates all the characteristics is mind, and that which transcends all characteristics is Buddha." If I were to explain it completely, I could not finish in an eon. Listen to my verse, which goes. So this is another very famous 4-line quote, 4-line verse. With regard to the mind, it's called wisdom. With regard to the Buddha, it's called meditation. When meditation and wisdom are maintained equally, all is pure within the consciousness. If you are enlightened to this teaching, it is through your cultivation of the nature. Its function is fundamentally birthless. The dual activation is correct. So a lot to uncover in this paragraph. So this man, Fahai, was a monk, and he asked the patriarch to explain to him why the mind is Buddha. What does it mean? And so the master said, so there's 3 time periods: the past, the present, and the future. For the preceding thought not to be generating in mind is mind. So preceding thought not to be generating. So all the future thoughts not to be generating is mind. Then there's the present, and then all the past thoughts not to be extinguished is Buddha. So this is very fascinating because he's saying that he's dealing with cause and effect. The cause is the future, and the effect in this context being the past. What has happened has happened. The effects are going to manifest in relation to the causes that's already been sold. So we don't deal with the effects of the succeeding thoughts. We don't extinguish them. But the causes that are to be arising now and in the future, we are able to remain pure and not to generate a mind that further disturbs. And so this is how we combine cause and effect with the 3 time periods to explain how to practice, basically. And so he was able to create 4-line verses to clarify this, and he says, with regard to the mind, it's called wisdom. With regard to the Buddha, it's called meditation. So the mind is the wisdom, and the Buddha is meditation. This is because the wisdom needs to be something to be wise in, and so the mind creates all the myriad manifestations and all the myriad phenomena in which is the wisdom, the teachings. And then in regards to the Buddha, it's just stillness. It's just pure awareness. And if you're able to maintain them equally, so that you are able to shine the light of stillness and clarity and awareness onto the mind of wisdom, that is the dual activation. So you're activating both form and emptiness. You're activating both mind and Buddha, both sentient being and enlightenment, wisdom and meditation. And if you are enlightened to this teaching, it is through cultivation of the nature. So you're able to understand the nature of this dualistic phenomena, this dualistic dharma. And by understanding it, you're able to become enlightened to the teaching. Fasai expressed a great enlightenment upon hearing these words. He gave praise in verses, saying, the mind is fundamentally Buddha. So this is a very famous 4-line verse that was given to Fahai upon becoming enlightened after making sense of the teachings of the Sixth Patriarch, Neng. So Fahai said, the mind is fundamentally Buddha. To be unenlightened to this is to subjugate oneself. I understand the causes of meditation and wisdom. By the dual activation, one transcends all things. So here it says that if you are enlightened to this teaching, it is through your cultivation of the nature. So this talks about the sudden teaching. So the sudden teaching is about attaining realization immediately, instantaneously attaining the state of the Buddha right now. But to be enlightened to such a teaching requires a lot of cultivation. So it's not like anyone can just immediately understand. If someone does understand the sudden teaching, it's because of their cultivation in the past. Maybe not just this life, but the past lives, because it deals with being able to uncover all the layers of afflictions and the layers of attachments. And so this monk was clearly a very highly cultivated monk, so that he was able to attain immediate enlightenment upon hearing these words. Next encounter, Master Fa Da was from Hongzhou. He left home to become a monk at 7 years old, after which time he constantly recited the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is known as the greatest Bodhisattva Sutra, so the greater vehicle sutra. This is the sutra that is praised within the sutra by the Buddha, and it's a very, very big sutra. It's got 26 chapters from memory, 28, and the assembly that he preached it to was vast. Like, all the bodhisattvas from all the 10 directions came to this sutra, and that just shows how significant this sutra was. So this monk, Fa Da, was reciting this sutra from the age of 7, which is a massive feat, because to even hear of this sutra, you must have great merit. So he came to do obeisance to Neng, but did not touch his head to the ground. The master rebuked him. To bow without touching the ground, can this be anything but irreverent? You must have something on your mind. To what are you disposed? So when someone pays respect to another person, it's traditional to place your head on the ground, because it shows a lot of humility. It shows respect. It shows reverence, because you're putting your head to the ground. You're basically putting yourself below him. That is how much respect you are supposed to be showing when you are paying respects on any level. And so immediately the master Neng was able to realize that he had something on his mind. He was not paying respect sincerely. And so Fa Da said, I have recited the Lotus Sutra 3,000 times. So he was clearly very proud of himself. The master said, even if you recite it 10,000 times, it won't help you understand the meaning of the scripture. You should practice along with me. You're understanding this effort without understanding how wrong it is. Listen to my verse. So here, Neng was clearly able to identify that his pride in having recited the Lotus Sutra 3,000 times, which is actually very remarkable by any standards, was not enough for him to understand and to penetrate the meaning of the sutra. So what he had was a clearly very superficial understanding. So Neng says, listen to my verse, which goes, reverence is fundamentally to bend the canopy of conceit. How can one's head not touch the ground? Have the illusion of selfhood and transgressions are generated. Destroy merits and one's blessings are beyond measure. And so this is fascinating, this 4-line verse. Basically saying that when you have sincere reverence, you're bending the canopy of conceit. So your true reverence is being able to transcend ignorance. And if you are able to be on that level of sincerity, how can one head not touch the ground? Because that is true representation, or that is how you truly show humility, truly show your level of non-conceit. But one is not able to do so, touch the head to the ground, if one still has the illusion of selfhood. And when one has the illusion of selfhood, it is through this illusion of self that the myriad of transgressions, that all the transgressions are generated. By having the idea of selfhood, we want to cultivate merit, because it's the self that enjoys the merits. But if we are able to transcend the illusion of selfhood, we can then destroy the merits. And by becoming detached from the merits, one's blessings then become beyond measure. So, very fascinating 4-line verse. Let's continue. So then, this is in continuing with the exchange, Fa Da and Master Neng. The master asks, what is your name? The monk answered, Fa Da. The master said, you are named Fa Da. But when have you ever penetrated the Dharma? Fa means Dharma, Fa, and then Da means to penetrate, to transcend. So basically his name means Dharma penetration, Dharma transcendence. But then he's asking you, that's your name, but when have you ever penetrated the Dharma? He spoke another verse, which went, another verse from Queen, and these are all gold. Your name is now Fada. You have diligently recited the Lotus Sutra without cease. Reciting in vain, you have only been emanating sounds. It is the wise mind that is called Bodhisattva. Since you have now had this connection with me, I will now explain Buddhism for you. Simply have faith that the Buddha was silent, that only lotuses came forth from his mouth. So now this is very, very profound. I'm getting shivers from reading this. So he's saying that Fada was applying great diligence in reciting the Lotus Sutra without cease. But without understanding the meaning, you're only just reciting in vain, and you're just emanating sounds. It's just like la ba 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 la ba la 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 blah blah. The words without its understanding of the meaning is just sounds. And so that's not the practice of the Bodhisattva, which is the sutra, which is who the sutra, the Lotus Sutra, was expounded for. This sutra was the sutra that the Buddha expounded only for the Bodhisattvas. He made that clear in the first opening sutra, opening chapter, when he was able to, with skillful means, remove all the arhats, or would remove all the lower teaching practitioners away from the assembly, so that only the Bodhisattvas remained. This was a clear. This sutra was clearly only designed for Bodhisattvas. And so he's saying it is a wise mind that is called Bodhisattva. A wise mind is one that is understanding of the meaning and not just emanating sounds. So now he's saying, since we have now this affinity, I will explain Dharma, the Buddhism for you. So now here he is saying, let me just explain to you the essence of Buddha, the essence of Buddhism, at the point where you're at, so that you can transcend. Because it's not to say that his recitations after years and years of diligence was in vain, because it is only after he has been able to recite to this point that Huineng is able to unlock the rest for him. If he didn't even do that in the beginning, then Huineng would have no foundation to work on. So it's not like anyone would be able to attain enlightenment upon hearing these lines, these following two lines, because not everyone would have done the arduous practice of reciting this sutra 3,000 times. But upon having recited it 3,000 times, Huineng is able to simply say, simply have faith that the Buddha was silent, that only lotuses came forth from his mouth, which is to say, the Buddha didn't say anything. And that is the real meaning of the fundamental nature. The fundamental nature is complete silence. So if you're attached to the teachings, which he clearly is, you have to transcend the teachings by realizing that nothing was taught in the beginning. Detach from the Lotus Sutra so that you can transcend it. Fascinating. That only lotuses came forth from his mouth. So the teachings were one of purity, because the lotus represents purity. Lotus is a beautiful flower that only grows in the dirt of the mud. And so if you're able to have faith that the Buddha never actually said anything, and the Buddha has said in sutras, I think the Great Nirvana Sutra, he did say, if one says that the Buddha actually said anything, then one is slandering the Buddha, which is a very, very, very strong words. But within that context of that sutra, it's saying that if you are saying that I have said anything, if I have taught anything, like the 3 refuges, the 4 great vows, the Noble Eightfold Path, then you're not really understanding the fundamental nature of Buddhism, which is non-duality, which is real emptiness. And from that perspective, the Buddha never said anything. So after Fata heard this verse, he said in gratitude, "From now on, I will be differential towards all. Your disciple has recited the Lotus Sutra without understanding its meaning, and my mind always harbored doubts. Your reverence's wisdom is vast. So would you please briefly explain the sutra's meaning?" So now he's saying that now he's able to detach from the teachings. He's able to become differential towards all. Before, he was clearly having a prejudice towards those of great wisdom with those of lesser wisdom. Those of great wisdom are those who similar to him, he was proud that he was able to recite so many times. He was clearly very proud of his own practice. So he was clearly favoring similar practitioners like him, but being able to transcend his discrimination, he's able to become more differential towards all. So now he's asking the reverends to explain the sutra's meaning. And so the master said, "Fata, the Dharma is profoundly penetrating, but your mind has not penetrated it yet. The sutra is fundamentally without doubt. It is your mind itself that doubts. As you recite the sutra, what is the central doctrine?" So now he's questioning the monk, Fata. What do you think the central doctrine is? What do you think the fundamental meaning of this sutra is? And so Fata humbly says, now he's very humble now, he says, "This student is dull of disposition and has always just relied on reciting the text. How can I understand its central purport?" The master then said, "I do not understand words, but try reciting the sutra for me once and I will explain it for you." So now he's asking Fata to explain to recite to him the sutra. He can obviously do it from memory. He's recited it 3,000 times. But this is a very long sutra, 28 chapters from memory, and it's got a lot of Chinese characters. If you were to recite it from front to back, it would take you a few hours, like 5 hours. So Fata then started to recite the sutra out loud. When he came to the chapter on parables, the master said, "Stop." Okay, I'm just going to quickly pull up the Lotus Sutra to get clarity on how many chapters and which chapter the parables chapter is. So the Lotus Sutra, the parable. Okay, so that means that he would have read up to chapter 3. So he would have finished reading chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 is the introduction, as always. Chapter 2 is the expedient means, which is skillful means of the Buddha. Fascinating, because he's talking about, this is the chapter that drove out all the arrogant monks. And that's not something that I'm saying. It's something that is said in that chapter. He was able to remove all the weeds among the plants. The words of the Buddha saying that he was able to remove all the arrogant monks. And only from then he started teaching the actual core central teachings. And so he would have stopped at the simile and parable. And so that means that Fata would have read 2 chapters, the introduction and the skillful means chapter. And so when he came to the chapter on parables, the master said, "Stop. The central doctrine of this sutra is fundamentally the causes and conditions of and the appearance of the Buddhas in the world. There can be no parables that surpasses this." So after reading the introduction chapter and the chapter on expedient means, Skillful means the master said, stop. I can understand now the entire sutra. By the way, how many chapters does the entire sutra have? 28 chapters. So he's saying, I can understand the entire sutra is about fundamentally explaining the causes and conditions and the appearances of the Buddha in the world. So this is what the whole sutra is about, which is fascinating. So now he's asking, what are the causes and conditions? The sutra says, the Buddhas and the world-honored ones only appear in the world through the causes and conditions of the one great affair. There is only one reason why the Buddhas of the 10 directions have showed themselves in the world, just for one reason. The one great affair is a perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. The Buddha of this world, the people of this world are delusively attached to the characteristics externally and delusively attached to the emptiness internally. If one is able to transcend the characteristics within characteristics and to transcend emptiness within emptiness, this is to be undiluted both externally and internally. If you are enlightened to this teaching, your mind will open up in enlightenment in a single moment of thought. This is to open the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. So this is fascinating, right? This is to say that the Buddhas of the 10 directions only come for one reason, and that reason is to allow all sentient beings to attain the level of the Buddha, to attain the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas, so to attain the Buddha's wisdom. So this chapter, this sutra highlights the purpose of all the Buddhas coming into the world of the 10 directions. The mind of the Buddha, the intention of the Buddha is to lead all sentient beings to Buddhahood, which means this. What is Buddhahood is basically defined here. Okay, sorry about that. Basically, what is Buddhahood? Let me repeat this again. So this is why people are not able to attain Buddhahood. This is the hindrance to Buddhahood. The people of this world are delusively attached to characteristics externally. So we are attached to the external world through the 5 senses. So externally, we are attached to the things that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And then we are also delusively attached to emptiness internally. So if one is able to transcend characteristics within characteristics, so he's already saying exactly how to attain the enlightenment and the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. If one is able to transcend characteristics, but where? You transcend characteristics within characteristics, because characteristics cannot be transcended by escaping it, by avoiding it. You have to transcend it within it, because characteristics only make sense within the context of characteristics or non-characteristics. And emptiness is only to be transcended within emptiness. You cannot transcend emptiness by leaving it, by escaping it. You have to transcend it within the context of emptiness. And characteristics and emptiness are one and one. Because of emptiness, it gives rise to characteristics. Because of characteristics, you give rise to emptiness. So you cannot transcend one without the other. That is to say that you cannot transcend externally without by leaving internally. So you have to transcend externally the characteristics from within emptiness. And so they are all one. They are all interdependent. You can't have characteristics without the backdrop of emptiness. You can't have emptiness without the backdrop of characteristics. So you transcend them both equally, simultaneously together. And if you are able, and so if one is able to transcend characteristics within characteristics and to transcend emptiness within emptiness, this is to be undiluted both internally and externally. And if you are able to be enlightened to this teaching, your mind will open up in enlightenment in a single moment of thought. And that's all it takes, is to have that one single moment of transcendence, internally and externally, the characteristics and emptiness. And this is to open up the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. Continuing on his conversation with Father, the Buddha Buddha. So first he was explaining what the causes and conditions for the Buddha coming into the world was, and now he's explaining the appearance of the Buddha. Buddha means enlightenment. This may be divided into 4 teachings: to open the perpetual understandings of enlightenment, to manifest the perpetual understanding of enlightenment, to be enlightened to the perpetual understanding of enlightenment, and to enter the perpetual understanding of enlightenment. So he's talking about the 4 teachings, the four aspects of perpetual understanding. One is to open, one is to manifest, one is to be enlightened, and then one is to enter. So it's like a 4-throng process. You open, you manifest, you enlighten to it, and then you enter it. If one is of opening and manifesting, one should be able to be enlightened and enter. Thus, perpetual understanding of enlightenment is fundamentally the true nature becoming manifest. You should be careful not to misinterpret the sutra and have a mistaken view of some other path. Opening and manifesting, being enlightened and entering, are themselves the perpetual understanding of the Buddha. And those in our school are no different. To interpret the sutra the way you do is to revile the sutra and vilify the Buddhas. That mind is Buddha, fully endowed with perpetual understanding. What use would there be of any further opening? So here he's saying that how we practice the understanding of Buddhism is we have to be careful not to misinterpret it. We have to open and manifest, and then being enlightened and enter. And that is how we attain the perpetual understanding of the Buddha. And this is the same teachings of all the schools of Buddhism. And if we don't understand this, then everything that we say regarding the teachings is to revile the sutra and to vilify the Buddhas. You should have faith that the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas is only your own mind. There is no other Buddha. It is only that all the sentient beings obstruct their own brilliance by the sensory realms of desire. Externally conditioned and internally disrupted, they take hectic delight in sensation. Then they belabor other world-honored ones to arise from their samadhi and use various harsh words to get them to stop. Don't seek outside yourself. You're no different from the Buddhas. Therefore, the Lotus Sutra says, open the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. Because here he's saying, right at the beginning of the encounter, Fata, the monastic Fata, was saying, the mind is the Buddha. Please explain this to me. And so now he's saying, you should have faith that the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas is only your own mind. So the mind that I have, the mind that you have, this is the Buddha. There is no other Buddha. This is the Buddha. The mind that we have is the Buddha. And how we can create the links, how we can reconcile, that's the word I was thinking of, how we can reconcile this statement is up to us, and it's our path. But he's saying that all sentient beings are obstructed by their own brilliance, are obstructing their own brilliance by the sensory realms of desire. So because of craving and desire, because of attachment to the 5 senses, we are not able to reconcile the mind and to lead it and to understand and penetrate the mind to the state of Buddhahood. And it is all within ourselves. And because we cannot do that, because we take hectic delight to sensation, we have to rely on all the Buddhas arising from their samadhi, from their deep meditation, to use the harsh words to get us to stop taking delight in sensation, stop going through this vicious cycle, and just just get to the point, just calm down, stop, just stop, basically just stop. Don't seek outside yourself. You are no different from the Buddha. So if we are able to understand this deeply enough, we realize that we are on the exact same level as the Buddha. We just don't see it because we haven't reconciled the mind yet. Once we reconcile the mind, and it's only up to us to reconcile our own mind, then we will be on the same level as the Buddha. I also exhort all of you to always open the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas within your own mind. So now he's talking about how to do that. The minds of people of this world are given to the false, and they stupidly commit transgressions. With good in their mouths and evil in their minds, they are lustful, angry, jealous, obsequious, and conceited, injuring people and damaging things. They open the perpetual understanding of sentient beings. If you are able to always generate wisdom in the correct state of mind, contemplating your own mind, stopping evil and practicing good, this is to open the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. You should open the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas in every moment of thought. Do not open the perpetual understanding of sentient beings. To open the perpetual understanding of the Buddha is to transcend the world. If you only struggle to grasp at thoughts as your task in life, how could this be any different from a yak loving his own tail? So here he's saying that the key difference between being a sentient being like us and being the Buddha is that the Buddha needs to have the clarity of awareness to constantly open up the perpetual understanding of the Buddha. The perpetual understanding of sentient beings is the mind of lust, anger, jealousy, obsession, conceit. And this mind of affliction, this mind of constant turning, is the mind of sentient beings. And if we are able to maintain the mind of the Buddha, which is the mind of perpetual understanding, and we are able to maintain this awareness on every thought moment, then we will be able to stop grasping at thoughts as our only task in life, which sounds very, very silly when you hear it in those words. But that is exactly what we are doing and what we've been doing for lifetimes upon lifetimes. So here he's urging us, stop this madness of clinging, of grasping our thoughts and making that our only task in life. Get back to understanding the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. And when they talk about that, it's not up to me to define what that means, because it's clearly been continuously defined within the sutra. And it's not something that I can just say, this is what it is, because it's not like that. It's not, this is how you do it, because then it's just attaching to another concept, attaching to another teaching. But it's not about attaching to anything. At the same time, it's not about detaching from whatever. Remember, in the previous, if I was to try to humbly explain what it means to open the perpetual understanding of the Buddha, he explained it here very clearly in one of the encounters. For the preceding thought not to be generating in mind, and for the succeeding thought not to be extinguished, is Buddha. So you don't try to extinguish the thoughts that are coming from the future to the past. And then, so if we talk about cause and effect, the thoughts and emotions and feelings that are going to be arising because of previous past causes, and these are just the effects, just let them flow as they naturally flow. But what we are doing now as the intentional cause is to not create further effects. And so this is where we proceed, the preceding thought not to be generated. We don't try to generate new karma. Don't try to not generate new thoughts. But the ones that are already generated, we let them flow. And so within the present moment, there is a clear distinction between cause and effect within the current moment. And so the current moment, we have to let the effects go as they go, but the causes, we don't generate new causes. And we do both simultaneously within the present moment. Okay, so Fata says, if this is so, then should one just understand the meaning and not bother to recite the sutras? So now he's trying to detach now, because he's trying to say, okay, then in that case, I will just detach from reciting the sutra. But then obviously it's not about detachment in the sense of attaching to detachment, in the sense of creating the intention to detach and using that as just grasping on another concept. So the master said, can the sutras be in error? How could they impede your mindfulness? It is just that delusion and enlightenment are in the person, that harm and benefit depend on oneself. To recite with the mouth and practice with the mind is to turn the sutra. To recite with the mouth without practicing in the mind is to be turned by the sutra. So here he's saying, whether you recite the sutra or not is not the point. You can recite it, you cannot recite it, but when has the sutra ever been in error? It's not the sutra's fault that you are attached. It's not the sutra's fault if you are ignorant. How could they be impeding your mindfulness? Because it's the mindfulness that we need to maintain. And we can maintain the mindfulness whether we are reciting or not. And it's not to say if we stop reciting it, then we are mindful now. And so now he tries to clarify what he has just said with some 4-line verses. Deluded in mind, one is turned by the lotus. Enlightened in mind, one turns the lotus. To recite the sutra without ever understanding is to be an enemy of its meaning. Be without thought and one's thoughts are correct. Be with thought and one's thoughts are false. If one considers neither with nor without, one will always ride the cart of the white bull. And this white bull is a reference to the Lotus Sutra, which is there are many carts that is described in the Lotus Sutra, and it's up to each sentient being which cart they want to pull. And the cart of the white bull was the strongest cart, the cart of the great Bodhisattvas. So this is a reference to that in the Lotus Sutra. And so here he's saying, deluded in mind, one is turned by the lotus. So we are being a slave to the lotus. We have to recite it for the sake of reciting it. We are just reciting it, making sound, but not understanding the meaning. So that is how the deluded are turned by the Lotus Sutra. And if we are to be enlightened in mind, we can use the Lotus Sutra to, like, as a tool, and not to be used by the Lotus Sutra. And then we are the tool to the Lotus Sutra. Here, we use it as a tool because the Lotus Sutra is very, very useful, clearly. It's one of the greatest sutras of the Buddha. So how can we use the Lotus Sutra? An enlightened mind can use it under his control and to practice it, to preach it, to use it as a tool for the benefit of himself and sentient beings. And so to be without thought, one's thoughts are correct. To be without thoughts, again, if we go back to the previous teaching, to be without thoughts is not to say to shut off all thoughts, because thoughts are still going to come as an effect of previous causes. If we are always playing games in the past, we will generate thoughts of, like, game-related thoughts in the present and in the future. Those thoughts are thoughts that we just allow to flow through because they are thoughts that are already going to happen because of past causes and conditions. But the present and the future causes, we try to remain without attachment, without thought. And so that's going to slowly purify the future effects, the future thoughts that are going to be coming as an effect. They will be a lot more sparse and a lot more pure, a lot less defiled. And that's what he means by to be without thought, and one's thought are correct. But if we're to be with thought, then one's thought becomes false. If one considers neither with nor without, one will always ride the cart of the white bull. Hearing this verse, Fa Da unwittingly cried tears of compassion, and upon hearing the words, he experienced a great enlightenment. He told the master, "From long ago until the present, I have never actually turned the lotus, but having been turned by the lotus." Fa Da announced further, "The sutra says all the great Sravakas, which is arhats, and bodhisattvas, even though they think about it and consider it as much as possible, cannot comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha. Now you would have ordinary people simply become enlightened to their own minds, yet you call that the perpetual understanding of the Buddhas. I am not of superior abilities, but I cannot help but doubt if this is to revile the scriptures. Although the sutras talk about the three carts, the sheep, the deer, and the bull carts, as well as the cart of the white bull, how are these different? I ask your reverence to explain these once again." So, having been able to create more understanding of the Dharma, it has just led him to have more doubts, because the Buddha in the sutra has stated that no one is able to understand the wisdom of the Buddha. And he says that within the sutra, the Lotus Sutra. He's saying that even the great arhats and the great bodhisattvas, because they have not attained the state of Buddhahood yet, is not able to comprehend even a fraction of the wisdom of the Buddha. So now he's saying, but now you're telling me that ordinary people can become enlightened to their own minds, and that is the perpetual understanding of the Buddha. So can you help me reconcile? What does that mean? On the one hand, the sutra is saying that no one can comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha. On the other hand, you're telling me that simple, ordinary people can immediately attain the perpetual understanding of the Buddha. So how can we reconcile those two seemingly conflicting statements? The Buddha said, "The meaning of the sutra is clear. It is you who is mistaken. The fault of the people of the three vehicles who are unable to comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha lies in their considering." Okay, let me repeat that. The fault of the people of the three vehicles who are unable to comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha lies in their considering. Trying to figure it out as much as they possibly can, they only get further and further away from the truth. The Buddha originally preached this principle for ordinary people, not for Buddhas. So clearly, okay, so those who were unable to believe have left the assembly. They were completely unaware that they were sitting on the white bull cart, but went outside to search for the other three carts. How much more clearly could the sutra say to you, there is only one Buddha vehicle and no other vehicle? Whether there might be two or three or an infinite number of expedient means, with various stories, metaphors, and sayings, these teachings all constitute the one Buddha vehicle. Okay, so this is very, very deep, and I'm getting shivers from reading this. So now the Master Huineng is saying that when the Buddha is saying that there are the three vehicles, the Arhat, so there's the Arhat vehicle, the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, the Bodhisattva vehicle. And when he talks about the three vehicles in the sutra, he actually talks about that there is only just one vehicle, and those three vehicles are merely expedient means to get people of different inclinations towards the one vehicle, which is the Buddha vehicle. So there has always ever only been the one vehicle that the Buddha preaches. The three vehicles or the three teachings seemingly appear to be three different teachings, but they are to gather all the people with different inclinations to get them all from where they are towards the same vehicle, which is the Buddha vehicle. So fascinating. And so it's not the Buddha's fault that we don't understand that, and we think that there are three different vehicles. Because when Fata is questioning right now, there are three different vehicles, and the Buddha says that people of these three vehicles cannot understand the wisdom of the Buddha. But now you're telling me that ordinary people can attain immediately the wisdom of the Buddha. So how can we reconcile these two statements? Master Hui Neng is saying that this is true from the perspective of the three vehicles. If you are attached to the three vehicles, it's impossible for you to attain the wisdom of the Buddha, because that's beyond the three vehicles. And so he's saying here that the Buddha originally preached this principle for ordinary people who were not for Buddhas, and those who were unable to believe have left the assembly. So as I mentioned before, in the second chapter, Expedient Means, when the Buddha said that he was praising a lot the expedient means of the Buddha, a lot of arrogant ones left. They were not able to accept. They were not willing to accept that what they had accomplished was not the ultimate. What they had thought that they had accomplished as the ultimate path, attaining arhatship, that was not the ultimate. That was only just a skillful means to get to the level of Buddhahood. And so if you were still just attached to the inferior teaching, then it's not, this sutra is not for you. You're not able to understand that there is only ever just one vehicle, the Buddha vehicle. And so if anyone is attached to the notion of the three teachings, they will never understand the Buddha's wisdom. But if anyone is able to detach from the three teachings and immediately transcend to the level of the Buddha, anyone can do that. But if you're not able to detach from the three vehicles, you're not able to do that. But if you're able to detach from the three vehicles, then anyone, even an ordinary, simple person, can attain the wisdom of the Buddha immediately. But it requires one to detach. This Fata monk is clearly very attached. He's very attached to the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, to his status as a monk that's been a monk since he was 7, reciting so many times. He's attached to the white bull cart. He's attached to him being on the superior teaching, superior vehicle. So now continuing on, how can you not understand? The three carts are provisional and were preached because of the past. The one vehicle is true and was preached because of the future. I teach only that you should repudiate the provisional and revert to the true. After reverting to the true will also have no name. You should understand that all the treasures you have are dependent on you and are used by you. Do not generate the thought. Do not generate the thought of being father. Do not generate the thought of being child. Do not, and be without any thought of their use. This is maintaining the Lotus Sutra. From aeon to aeon, one's hand does not let go of the text. From morning to night, there is no time. One is not mindful of it. So now this is how you truly practice the Lotus Sutra. He's saying here that the three carts are clearly just provisional, and they are not the true essence of the sutra. If you want to practice the true essence of the sutra, you have to be able to rely on just yourself, dependent on you and used by you. All the treasures within the mind, you have to use that, and don't use anything external. And so you don't generate the thought of being a father, you don't generate the thought of being a child, you don't generate any thought of anything, of any use of anything. And that is how you maintain the Lotus Sutra. So now Fata achieved revelatory inspiration and leaped up in ecstasy. In verses he gave praise, saying, "The 3,000 times I have recited the sutra are forgotten with a word from Hui Neng of Cao Ti. Not understanding the supramundane truth, How could one exhaust the deluded waste of so many lifetimes? The sheep, deer, and bull carts are provisionally established to be well lifted up to the higher level of meaning, early, middle, and late. Who understands that he without the house of fire is fundamentally the king within the dharmas? So now it appears that he has finally attained the meaning, the true meaning of the Lotus Sutra. And so he's able, so now he says that after reading it for 3,000 times, they are all immediately forgotten. He is able to finally transcend the attachment to the sutra. But before then, he was not able to understand its supramundane truth. So how can one exhaust the deluded waste of so many lifetimes? Having practiced so many lifetimes, it's been just wasted because you're not really understanding the supramundane truth. And so the three vehicles are provisionally established. And it's to lift you all up to the high level of the Buddha. He who understands that he is within the house of fire is fundamentally the king of the dharmas. Who understands that he is within the house of fire is fundamentally the king within the dharmas. This is fascinating. The house of fire is a parable that was explained within the Lotus Sutra, saying that the Buddha is, so this is actually the parable where he brings up the three carts, the sheep, deer, and the bull cart. Within the house of fire, the Buddha sees himself as the father within the house of fire, and the house of fire is samsara. All his children are playing joyfully there, not recognizing the house is on fire, and they are all in immediate danger. The father wants to pull them all out. With his expedient means, he uses temptations to get them out. And so now he's saying that if someone understands that he is within the house of fire, so you're not trying to transcend the house of fire anymore. The house of fire is samsara. The house of fire is cyclical birth and death. If you are able to accept that you are within the house of fire, then you are fundamentally the king within the dharmas. Because the Buddha never left the house of fire. The Buddha is always within the house of fire, but transcending it from within. Whereas every other three vehicle are trying to escape the house of fire. And by trying to escape the house of fire, they are always not being able to touch or transcend from the house of fire. Wow. So now the master said, from now on, you may be said to be a monk who is mindful of the sutra. And so now he is finally able to be the monk who is mindful of the Lotus Sutra. Vada comprehended the mysterious purport through this and never ceased reciting the sutra. Incredible. Because before he was questioning, should I even still continue reciting it? If reciting it means that I am attached to it. And then Huining said, reciting it doesn't mean that you're attached to it. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you can't recite it anymore, because the sutra is not the fault of whether or not you are mindful or not moment to moment. So because of that, he still clearly had a very strong affinity to the sutra, which is why he was reciting it in the first place. And that affinity has led him to continue reciting it, even though he has already transcended it. Fascinating. Another encounter. So that was a fascinating encounter, full of Dharma. Now, the monk Zitong was from Anfeng in Shaozhou. First, he read the Lankavatara Sutra, and doing so about 1,000+ times. This is another very famous sutra. This is one of the earliest sutras, perhaps the sutra that he recited upon his. If this is the flower ornament sutra, then this is the sutra that he recited upon attaining enlightenment. What are the other names for this sutra? Okay, anyways, let me continue. So this monk, Zhe Tong, after reading it 1,000+ times, but he did not understand the 3 bodies and the 4 wisdoms. So he did obeisance to the master and asked for an explanation of these doctrines. The master said, as to the 3 bodies, the pure Dharmakaya is your nature. The perfect and complete Sambhogakaya is your wisdom. And the 1,000 billion Namanakayas is your practices. To speak of the 3 bodies apart from the fundamental nature is called having the bodies but being without wisdom. If you are enlightened to the fact that 3 bodies have no self-natures, then you will understand the body of the 4 wisdoms. So this is very, very deep. He's saying that the 3 bodies of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Namanakaya, are without self-natures. They don't have someone that's controlling these. They are just created from causes and conditions. The Dharmakaya is the fundamental nature of emptiness. The Sambhogakaya is the wisdom. So that is the all-knowing wisdom and knowledge. And then the Namanakaya is the skillful means and the practices. That is how you use to conduct yourself in the world. When you are a teacher, when you are a doctor, when you are a farmer, when you are a father, mother, any skill set that you are manifesting is the Namanakaya. So this is the mental activities. This is the roles that you play. And so he's saying that the 3 bodies, apart from the fundamental nature, is called having the bodies but without having the wisdom. Because those 3 are it. There is nothing beyond that. So they are it. So now he clarifies what he means by the 4-line verses, famous 4-line verses. The self-natures are endowed with the 3 bodies. Generating illumination, the 4 wisdoms are created. Without transcending the conditions of seeing and hearing, one transcendentally ascends to the stage of Buddhahood. I am now explaining this teaching for you. Believe clearly and be without delusion forever. Do not study by racing after it. You will always preach, and you will always preach boldly. Wow. So Zhe Tong said further, how might I hear the meaning of the 4 wisdoms? And the master said, if you understand the 3 bodies, then you will understand the 4 wisdoms. How can you ask any further? If I were to speak of the 4 wisdoms apart from the 3 bodies, this would be having the bodies but not having the wisdom. This would be having the wisdom but making it non-wisdom. So he preached another verse. The great round mirror wisdom is pure in nature. The wisdom of the universally same nature is without illness in mind. The seeing of the wondrous contemplation wisdom is not the result of merit. The wisdom that creates that which is accomplished is identical to the mirror, to the round mirror. The 5 and the 8, 6th and 7th consciousnesses transform through results and causes. These are just names that are used with no true nature. If one's sentiments linger not in the places of the transformations, in profusion one does not generate in the locus of permanence, the samadhi of the dragon. So this is to say that the 3 bodies are manifesting the 4 wisdoms, and that they are all just names. They are all, even the 3 bodies and the 4 wisdoms are just names. And if you were to remove the names, which are conditioned with other names, because you're labeling something in relation to something else. If you were to remove the labels, there'd be nothing left. And so they are just names and with no true nature. Understanding that is all you need to do. So now, here, this is a side note. Thus are the consciousnesses transformed into the wisdoms. In the teachings it says, transform the first 5 consciousnesses, which is the 5 sense organs, into the wisdom that creates that which is accomplished. Transform the 6th consciousness, which is the mind, into the wisdom of the wondrous contemplation. Transform the 7th consciousness, which is the ego, into the wisdom of the universally same nature. Transform the 8th consciousnesses, which is the everything, like the storage of all the thoughts and all the feelings, is basically the mind ground, into the great round mirror wisdom. So you're turning that into a mirror that you can just view. This is what I think, feel, see of the 3 time periods. Although the 6th and 7th are transformed within the cause, the first 5 and the 8th are transformed on the basis of results. Only the names are transformed and the consciousnesses are not transformed in their essence. Zheng achieved sudden enlightenment to the nature and the wisdoms. He then offered this verse. The 3 bodies are originally the essence of oneself. The 4 wisdoms are fundamentally the understanding of the mind. The bodies and wisdoms interpenetrate without hindrance, responding to things in accordance with forms or deliberate activations of cultivation is false activity. To guard one's abiding is not true serenity. The wondrous purport has been illuminated by the master. I will forever forget all defiled names. So now he shows that he has transcended names and labels, and he's able to stop guarding one's abiding because it's not the true serenity. He's able to finally detach. Moving on, because this is taking very long now. Moving on. The monk Zhe was from Guiqi in Xinzhou. He left home to become a monk when he was 7 or 8 and intently sought to see the nature. When he paid his respects one day, the master asked, "Where did you come from and what do you seek?" Zhe said, "Recently, this student went to Mount Baifeng in Hongzhou, where I did obeisance to Reverend Sheng Zui." If you remember, Sheng Zui is his competitor, if you would, the one that wrote the first one, the first 4-line verse in which Hui Neng responded with his 4-line quote. Everyone in the monastery at the time, the other one that he attained great enlightenment, where he received a transmission from the 5th Patriarch, where he became the 6th Patriarch, that monastery. Everyone in the monastery thought that Reverend Sheng Zui was going to be the 6th Patriarch. So he is, in many cases, known as the direct competitor of Hui Neng. But Hui Neng never acknowledged him as a competitor. He never really fought that battle. But everyone, all the disciples of Sheng Zui and the disciples of Hui Neng, see each other as competing schools. So this monk Zhe Chang, having done obeisance to Reverend Sheng Zui and heard his teachings on seeing the nature and achieving Buddhahood, and since I was unable to resolve my lingering doubts, I have traveled this distance to do obeisance to you. I beseech your reverend in your compassion to teach me. So now he's learned from Sheng Zui, but he's not satisfied, and he still has a lot of doubt. So now he's come to Reverend Hui Neng, the 6th Patriarch, to seek further guidance. The master said, "How did he phrase his teachings? Try to repeat it to me." So now the master is curious as to how Sheng Zui teaches his teachings. How does he practice so that he can try to potentially correct any wrong teachings? So Zhe Chang said, "After arriving there, I received no teachings for 3 months because of the importance of the Dharma. One night, I entered Sheng Zui's quarters alone to inquire of him, 'What is my fundamental mind, my fundamental nature?' Sheng Zui then said, 'Do you see space?' I said, 'I see.' He said, 'When you see space, does it have characteristics or not?' I answered, 'Space is without form. What characteristics could it have?' He said, 'Your fundamental nature is like space, in that there is not a single thing at all that can be seen. This is called correct seeing. For there to not be a single thing that can be known is called true knowing, that there is no blue and yellow, long and short. Just see the fundamental source is pure, the essence of enlightenment is perfect and bright. This is called seeing the nature and achieving Buddhahood. Wow, so it seems like he's trying to mirror the teachings of Hui Neng, because this is not what he wrote as the 4-line verses in the first chapter. Because he was likened Bodhi to a mirror and how you should constantly scrub it to keep it clean. So continuing on, it is also called the perpetual understanding of the Tathagata. Even though this student heard this teaching, I was still not certain, so I beg your reverence to teach me. So the master said, that teacher's explanation still allows perpetual understanding to exist, which is why you were unable to comprehend. I will now reveal a verse to you. So it seems like when you're trying to explain the true nature or the essential teachings, you can only explain it in reference to something else that has already been explained. If you were to explain it initially from the first moment without a reference point, then you're just creating a concept. But if you're explaining it in reference to something that's already been explained, then you're just using that concept to return back to non-concept. But you can't return to non-concept without an existing concept. And it seems like that is why Shen Sui has been such a great person for Hui Neng, because Shen Sui has always created that initial concept for Hui Neng to return back to non-concept. But how can you return to non-concept without a concept to begin with? That is just my understanding. So the master said that, so then he will explain his teaching. I will now reveal a verse to you. Not seeing a single dharma, but maintaining the view of non-being, is much like floating clouds blocking the face of the sun. Not knowing a single dharma, but maintaining one's knowledge of emptiness, is just like the great void, generating lightning and thunder. When such perpetual understanding arises from the slightest instant, how can mistaken recognition ever understand expedient means? You should understand the errors of this yourself in a single moment of thought, and the luminous brilliance of the self will be constantly manifest. So when Zhetang heard this verse, his mind became suddenly expansive in enlightenment, and he related in verse. There is no reason to activate perpetual understanding, to be attached to the characteristics and seek for Bodhi. When one's intelligence harbors a single thought of enlightenment, how can one transcend the delusions of the past? The self-nature, enlightened to the essential source, illuminates the crazed currents of awareness, without entering the room of the patriarch in a daze, going about with two heads. So let's try to make sense of the verses from Hui Neng. Not seeing a single dharma, but maintaining the view of non-being, is much like floating clouds blocking the face of the sun. So here he's saying that Shen Sui is attached to nothingness, attached to emptiness. And so he's trying to teach seeing nothingness. Because here he's saying space is without form, your fundamental nature is like space, and there is not a single thing that can be seen. And if that is the concept that you're attaching to, then not seeing a single dharma is maintaining the view of non-being. So you're attaching to non-being and saying that I am non-being. So this is like floating clouds blocking the face of the sun. So there is still delusion in that. Not seeing a single dharma but maintaining one's knowledge of emptiness is just like the great void generating thunder and lightning. So not knowing a single dharma but maintaining one's knowledge of emptiness. When such perpetual understanding arises for a slightest instant, how can one mistaken recognition ever understood expedient means? You should understand the error of this yourself, and in a single moment of thought, the luminous brilliance of the self will be constantly manifest. So, what instead of seeing a single dharma, instead of not seeing dharma, but maintaining the view of non-being, you should, in the not knowing in a single dharma, maintain one's knowledge of emptiness. So seeing without seeing. It basically goes back to the idea where he mentioned before in the previous encounter, with the preceding thoughts to not generate the mind, and with the succeeding thoughts to not extinguish thoughts. Okay, let's move on. So now, one day, Tang asked the master, the Buddha preached the three vehicles, and he also spoke of the supreme vehicle. I don't understand these doctrines and would like you to explain it to me. So these are the three vehicles, the Arhat, the Pratyeka Buddha, and the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva being the greatest one, because it's the one that leads all sentient beings with him to Buddhahood. The master said, when you contemplate your own fundamental mind, do not be attached to the external characteristics of Dharma. There is no four vehicles in the Dharma. The fourth one, adding the fourth one, is the Buddhahood. It is only that people's minds vary. To learn and recite is the small vehicle. To be enlightened to the Dharma and understand its meaning is the middle vehicle. And to cultivate according to the Dharma is the great vehicle. To penetrate all the myriad Dharmas and to be equipped with all the myriad Dharmas without any defilement at all. To transcend the characteristics of the various Dharmas without anything that is attained. This is called the supreme vehicle. Vehicle has the meaning of practice and cannot be argued about orally. You must cultivate yourself, not ask me about it, and at all times the self-nature is itself such like. So here he's saying, he's defining the three vehicles, and then he's talking about the great vehicle being so there's the small, medium, and the great. Now, the supreme vehicle in this context is the Buddha vehicle, is to penetrate all the myriad Dharmas. So you're not just selecting one, you're choosing everything, and you're not discriminating between I want this, I don't want this, I like this, I don't like this, I will study this, I don't study this. And to penetrate all the myriad Dharmas and to be equipped with all the myriad Dharmas without any defilement at all. So you're seeing everything the way it is in its fundamental nature, and you're not rejecting anything. You're accepting everything, which in a byproduct means that you're accepting all sentient beings. You're accepting everyone without discrimination between I like him, I don't like her, he is good, she is bad, all these discriminations. So to transcend the characteristics of the various Dharmas without anything that is attained. So this is two-pronged. You're transcending all the characteristics of all the various Dharmas. Every single Dharma, like if we talk about discrimination, humanity right now, we can categorize people in different races, nationalities, professions, sexes, marital status, color of the skin, all these different discriminations. If we were to transcend all those various discriminations and their dharmas, then we would be able to accept and make peace with all the sentient beings. But sentient beings is just one dharma as well. If we want to accept all life forms, everything, basically everything, all dharmas we accept and we penetrate, we transcend. But without anything to be attained. There's nothing to be attained. What is there to be attained is another dharma. And we have to transcend that. So we don't imply that we have attained anything. And this is said continually, time and time again. If the Buddha has said that if you believe that you have attained anything, you're still attached to a Dharma, and you haven't transcended the Dharma yet. And so to be in complete acceptance that you haven't attained anything, there is nothing to be attained. That is attaining the supreme vehicle. And so vehicle has the meaning of practice. It cannot be argued about orally. So if we are able to transcend all the dharmas without attaining anything, what is there to possibly talk about? It is not something that we can argue about orally. It is a means of practice that we cultivate within oneself. Anything that we are talking about is just arguing with dharmas and concepts and trying to pretend like we've achieved anything. There is nothing to be achieved, and that is the supreme vehicle. You must cultivate yourself and not ask me about it. At all times, the self-nature is itself such like. So Zhe Tang thanked Neng and served the master until the end of his years. Moving on, the monk Zhe Dao was from Nanhai in Guangzhou. He requested the benefit of the master's teachings, saying, "Since this student left home to become a monk, I have spent more than 10 years pursuing the Nirvana Sutra, but I haven't understood its message. Would your reverence favor me with your explanation?" The master said, "What is it you don't understand?" Zhe Dao said, "I am in doubt about the lions." So everyone obviously practices one sutra and dedicates his entire life to the one sutra. And because one sutra encompasses all the sutras, and one sutra, if you cultivate any one sutra to its ultimate, you will understand eventually everything. Because every sutra in itself is enough. So this man cultivates the Nirvana Sutra, and he has doubts about these lines. The lines are, "All processes are impermanent, these being the dharmas of generation and extinction. When generation and extinction are extinguished, quiescence is blissful." So all dharmas, all processes, all things are impermanent. They arise and pass away. And these being the dharmas of generation and extinction, everything arises and passes away. When generation and extinction are extinguished, quiescence is blissful. Okay, so there can be clearly a lot of misunderstanding to these lines. So let's see what he has doubts. What doubts do you have? Zhe Dao said, "All sentient beings have two bodies, the physical body and the Dhammakaya. The physical body is impermanent and subject to generation and extinction, but the Dhammakaya is permanent and is without knowing and without cognition. The sutra says, when generation and extinction are extinguished, quiescence is blissful. But I don't know which body is quiescent and which body experiences the bliss. If the physical body, when it is extinguished, the four elements would disperse. This would result in a state of total suffering, and suffering cannot be called blissful. If it is the Dhammakaya that becomes extinguished, then one would be identical to the plants and rocks. And who would experience the bliss? Further, the Dhamma nature is the essence of the five skandhas, and the five skandhas are functions of generation and extinction. There is one essence and five functions. If generation and extinction are permanent, if there is generation, then the functions would be activated on the basis of the essence. And if this is extinction, then the functions would revert into the essence. To hear that there is generation once again implies that sentient beings are subject to neither annihilation or extinction. But not to hear that there is generation once again implies a permanent reversion to quiescence, which would make sentient beings identical to inanimate objects. If this were the case, then all the Maya dharmas would be contravened by nirvana and would not be generated. So how would there be bliss? Okay, so he is obviously not really understanding everything, and he's just creating so much layers of false fuels. First of all, he doesn't understand the idea of the physical body and the mind, the body and the mind. And he has wrongly stated that the physical body, that the mind is the Dharmakaya. The mind is, in that context, the mind is not the Dharmakaya, because he's saying here that the mind is permanent. So anyways, it doesn't make sense. So we don't have to place too much attention on this, because this doesn't make sense. So let's just hear what the master has to say. You are a disciple of the Buddha, so why are you cultivating the false views of annihilism and eternalism, of the heterodox paths? So now he's saying, what you're saying is not even Buddhism. What you're saying is the paths, the heterodox paths of either a nihilistic and eternalism. To explain the teaching of the Supreme Vehicle on the basis of what you have just said would be to imply that there is a Dharmakaya separate from the body, the physical body, and that one must transcend generation and extinction in order to achieve quiescence. So now he's saying that the physical body and the Dharmakaya are not separate, because what he's implying, this monk, Zhi Dao, is implying that there are two bodies and they are separate bodies. The physical body and the Dharmakaya are separate, and that one must transcend generation and extinction in order to achieve quiescence. And he's also implying that those two are different, are separate. And again, nothing is separate, because if anything is separate, it's like trying to seek nirvana outside of nirvana. Okay, wait, no. It's like trying to seek emptiness, or it's trying to seek Buddhahood. Like that is like trying to seek the horns of a rabbit. Rabbits don't have horns. Trying to seek Buddhahood outside of the world is impossible. Trying to seek the Dharmakaya outside of the body is impossible. Trying to seek quiescence outside of generation and extinction is impossible. Further, you have argued that the Nirvana Sutra's doctrine of permanence and bliss, that there is a body that experiences the functions, but this doctrine was preached on behalf of sentient beings who poignantly grasp onto samsara and are shamefully attached to the world's pleasures. You should now understand that the Buddha preached on behalf of all deluded people that the five skandhas conjoin to make their own essence and characteristics. So the five skandhas of form, consciousness, feelings, thoughts, and sensations, and cognition, those five skandhas perpetuate each other, and they create the sense of self. Sentient beings discriminate all the dharmas as external sensory characteristics, taking generation as good and extinction as bad, and being swept along moment after moment. They do not understand that the dreamlike phantasmagoria are false, and they pointlessly and crazily experience samsara, thinking that permanent and blissful nirvana is transformed into the characteristics of suffering. They rush seeking after it all the time. So taking pity on such people, the Buddha indicated the true blissfulness of nirvana. If even for an instant there is no characteristic of generation, and if even for an instant there is no characteristic of extinction, then there will be no generation and extinction that can be extinguished. This is to have quiescence right there. But, okay, so let me repeat this. So this is what the Buddha means by true blissfulness of nirvana. If even for an instant there is no characteristic of generation, and if even for an instant there is no characteristic of generation, of extinction, then there would be no generation and extinction that can be extinguished. And this is quiescence right there. So you transcend characteristics of extinction and generation, and that is quiescence. So you're not waiting to extinguish it, you're transcending it from within, but not destroying it. But if when it is right there, one does not have the thought of it being right there, this is called permanent and blissful. So That's exactly what he means by, but if when it is right there, one does not have the thought of it being right there. So you're within it and transcending it from within. This is called permanent and blissful. This bliss is not experienced and is not experienced. How can there be categories of one essence and 5 functions? And how could one possibly speak of nirvana contravening the Maya dharmas and rendering them permanently ungenerated? This is to revile the Buddha and destroy the Dharma. Listen to my verse. The insurpassable great nirvana is perfect and bright, always serene and illuminating. Foolish ordinary people call it death, and the heterics grasp at it as annihilation. Those who seek the two vehicles refer to it as unconditioned. Of all that is conditioned by sentient beings, of all the 62 heterodox views, it is the fundamental source. To falsely posit empty names, how can these be true doctrines? It is only those who go beyond thinking, who generate and are without grasping and rejecting. Thereby does one understand the teachings of the 5 skandhas and of the self within the skandhas, externally manifesting the images of forms and all the characteristics of sound. Considering all these to be universally same, like dreams and phantasmagoria, not activating the view of the extinction between ordinary people and sages, not forming an interpretation of nirvana, the 2 extremes of viewpoints and the 3 limits of time are eradicated. Always responding to the functions of the senses, but not activating the thought of function, discriminating all the dharmas, but not activating the thought of discrimination. Even though the eon-ending fire burns to the floor of the ocean, and the winds pound upon the mountains like drums, the true bliss of permanent quiescence, the characteristic of nirvana is such like. I have now resorted to words to explain it, so that you would discard your false views. If you do not follow these verbal interpretations, you may be able to understand a little bit. If you do not follow these verbal interpretations, you may be able to understand it a little bit. Upon hearing this verse, Zedao experienced the great enlightenment. He leapt up in ecstasy, did obeisance, and retired. Okay, let's move on. Chan Master Xingzi was born in the Liu family of Ancheng in Zhezhou. Hearing that the teaching of sentient beings was flourishing from the Dharma seat of Kaoqi, he came to consult and do obeisance to Queen Neng. He asked, "What task should one undertake so as not to backslide and fall down the stages?" The master asked, "What have you done in the past?" Okay, now this is a very interesting one. So he's asking, what should one undertake to not transgress back down? Because we talk about transgression as going down the lower realms and transcendence as to go up. So he's saying, what can one do to prevent from going down to the lower realms? So now the master is asking, what have you done in the past? And Xingzi said, I have not performed even the sagely truth. So then the master asked, what stages would you fall down? The Xingji said, without having performed the sagely truth, what stages can there be? The master was profoundly impressed by Xingji and made him the chief among his followers. One day, the master said to Xingji, you should go off and teach somewhere so that the Dharma is not cut off. So first of all, his responses are profound, and the profundity reached Hui Neng, which was like, wow, your level is very high. You should be my chief assistant. And then eventually told him to teach the Dharma so that the Dharma would not die out. So let's dissect what he said. He asked, what task should one undertake so as not to backslide and fall down the stages? So the master questioned him, what have you done in the past? Like, what is your practice? Why are you afraid of sliding down? What are the transgressions you have done? What is your practice? And he said, I have not performed even the sagely truth. So he's saying, I have done nothing good, nothing bad. I have not even performed the sagely truths, which is the four noble truths. And so the master said, what stages, in that case, what stages would you fall down? And he said, without even performing the sagely truths, what stages can there be? So he is someone that has no practice, and he does not see in himself anything to go up in, anything to go down in. He does not see any practice that is worthy of practicing. And so the master says, wow, your level of cultivation is very high, so much so that you are not attached to any practice, nor are you attached to any destinations or any mental states, any realms and states to go up and down in. You are basically floating. And so now, since he thus ordained the Dharma, then returned to Mount Xingyuan in Zhezhou, where he disseminated the Dharma and taught sentient beings. His posthumous title is Hongji Chan Shi, which is the meditation master, extensive salvation. So this one encounter does highlight, because so far we've only explained the levels of inferiority or the levels of misunderstanding. This is a level of understanding, according to Hui Neng. Moving on, Chan Master Huairang was from the Du family of Jinzhou. And first he studied under National Master Lao An of Mount Song. Lao An sent him to Chaoji to consult Hui Neng. When Huairang arrived, he did obeisance, and the master asked, where did you come from? He said, Mount Song. The master said, no matter what kind of thing, how would it come? Huairang said, if you say it's like a thing, then you're off the mark. The master said, then can it be cultivated or realized? He said, cultivation and realization are non-existent, but defilement does not occur. The master said, if it's only that he are not defiled, then this is the mindfulness maintained by the Buddhas. You are such as this, and I am such as this. Prajñā of Western India predicted, beneath your feet will come a pony who will trample the people of this world to the depths. What you should do will be revealed within your mind. Do not preach too quickly. One text lacks the 27 characters beginning with Western India. So Huairang experienced a sudden expansive conjunction with the fundamental mind. Thereupon he served as Hui Neng's attendant for 15 years, becoming more immersed in the mysterious profundity day to day. Later he went to Nanyue, where he greatly disseminated the Chan school by imperial proclamation. His posthumous title was the Chan Master Da Hui, meditation master, or Chan Master, great wisdom. So this one is another very fascinating one, because here's another one of great understanding. Because when he asked, where did you come from? Mount Song. No matter what kind of thing, how would it come? So how would anything come? No matter what is being referenced, how can it come? How can anything come? What is your response to that? And he said, if it's a thing, if you say it's a thing, then you're off the mark. So he rebuked the master, saying, what thing are you talking about? If you're talking about anything, then you're already off the mark. And so the master said, then can it be cultivated or realized? So he's saying, can the non-thing, or can the absence of thing, be cultivated or realized? And he's saying cultivation and realization are also non-existent, but defilement does not occur. So he's clearly also planted firmly within emptiness, but not the emptiness in the sense of it being a thing, So he is clearly someone that has penetrated real emptiness. And so the master said, if it's only that you here are not defiled, then this is the mindfulness maintained by the Buddhas. You are such as this, and I am such as this. So then he explained that what you will teach will be revealed within your own mind. Do not preach too quickly. So he immediately granted him the permission to teach, because you're at the level where you can teach. Teaching the teaching of non-teaching. Teaching the teaching of non-teaching. Okay, so this one. Schwanz said, okay, so now here, Chan Master Yongjia Xuanyue was from the Dai family of Wenzhou. When he was young, he studied the sutras and sastras and trained in the teachings of cessation and concentration and insight meditation of Tian Tai. Tian Tai is another school of teaching. If I'm not mistaken, Tian Tai is, I have to check which sutra. Okay, so yeah, says he. Tian Tai is the let me just check Tian Tai. Which subject, which sutra does it teach? Oh yes, it's the Lotus Sutra. So Tian Tai is the Buddhist school that studies the Lotus Sutra. So he must be very well versed in the Lotus Sutra, but through reading the Vilamakirti Sutra, he illuminated his mind ground. So after studying the Lotus Sutra, which is the Sutra of the great Bodhisattvas, he studied the Vilamakirti Sutra, which is the Bodhisattva of the lay people that practice the Bodhisattva path. And that was what helped him attain illumination of his mind ground. Coincidentally, he visited and discussed the Dharma with the master student Xuanz. Everything he said was in implicit accord with the teachings of the patriarchs. So Xuanz said, from whom did you attain the Dharma? He said, I heard that there is a succession of teachers from the Mahayana Sutras and Sastras. Later I became enlightened to the central doctrine of the mind of the Buddha by reading the Vilamakirti Sutra. As yet, no one has verified my realization. So here he's seeking verification of his realization. Xuan said, attained prior to the king's sound of dignity, becoming enlightened oneself without a teacher after king's schools of dignity. In both cases, this is the heretical path of naturalism. Xuan Jue said, may I request that you verify my realization? But Xuan said, my words carry no weight, but in Cao Qi, there is the Sixth Patriarch, Great Master Neng. Students assemble there from the four directions like clouds. You would certainly receive this Dharma, and if you would go there, I will accompany you. So he's saying, I cannot verify your realization, but my master, the Sixth Patriarch Neng, can verify you. So then he went to consult the master. Upon his arrival, he walked around the master 3 times, shook his staff, and stood still. So this is what traditional practitioners do when they would meet someone of very high level, like the Buddha, for example. They would circulate. It's called circumambulation. Or yeah, you would circle someone 3 times, and then you would bow down. But here, he stood still. And so the master said, monks are provided with the 3,000 forms of deportment and 80,000 specific practices. Where have you come from, O great virtue, to generate such great self-conceit? So he's saying like, wow, the master was very impressed by his comportment, because he clearly knew how to behave as a very strict practitioner. So then Xuan Jue said, the matter of birth and death is great, and impermanence is rapid and swift. The master said, why don't you understand that birthlessness and comprehend that there is no swiftness? Xuan Jue said, the essence is birthless, and comprehension is fundamentally without swiftness. So then he said, so it is, so it is. Only then did Xuan Jue do obeisance to Hui Neng with full ceremony. So that is to say, full ceremony is to bow down with your shoulders exposed, well, one shoulder exposed, and that is the full ceremony. When he was standing, it wasn't the full ceremony, but now he's bowing down, and then he immediately said that he was going to leave. The master said, now isn't that really swift? Xuan Jue said, the fundamental is itself motionless. How can there be swiftness? The master said, who knows its motionlessness? So he's asking a question, who? He's predicating that there is a subject. And so Xuan Jue said, you just gave birth to discrimination. The master said, you have profoundly attained the meaning of the birthless. Xuan Jue rebuked again, how can the birthless have a meaning? The master said, if there is no meaning, who is there that discriminates? And so Xuan Jue says, nor is discrimination a meaning. The master said, how excellent, but at least stay one night. From this time, they called him One Night Xuan Jue. Later, he wrote the Song of Enlightenment, which is a very famous poem or article, which was disseminated throughout the world. His posthumous title was Wu Xiang Da Shi, Great Master Without Characteristics. Wu Xiang Da Shi. At the time, he was called Shen Jue. So this is fascinating. This exchange is fascinating. Now we're getting to the encounters that illustrate high levels of understanding. So let's go through this again. So first he's asking, where does one come from, or great virtue, to generate such great self-conceit? Okay, let me reframe. He's saying self-conceit because he's saying that you're not bowing your head, you're standing up still. Where did you study this to achieve, to show, to represent such great pride? So he's saying, the great master of birth and death is great. The matter of birth and death is great, and impermanence is rapid and swift. The master then said, why don't you understand that birthless and comprehend that there is no swiftness? So he's saying, the essence is birthless, and the comprehension is fundamentally without swiftness. So he's showing that he does understand. He understands birthless in the essence, and he understands swiftlessness within the fundamental, within the comprehension of birthless. So the master says, so it is, so it is. Only then did Xuan Jue do obeisance and give the full ceremony. He then immediately said that he was going to leave. So this is fascinating because it seemed like he was already ready to go, because he had already achieved what he came for, which was verification. And so when the master said, so it is, so it is, that was verification to him that he had understood the fundamental principle. And so when he said he was going to leave, the master said, now isn't that really swift? And so Xuan Jue, speaking from the mind ground, said, the fundamental is without motionless. How can there be swiftness? He's asking, what are you talking about? Why are you bringing up the characteristic of swiftness? So the master said, who knows its motionlessness? The who clearly predicates that there is an object, there is a subject. So Xuan Jue said, you have just given rise to discrimination by predicating that there is someone that knows. So the master said, you have profoundly attained the meaning of birthless. And then so he said, how can the birthless have a meaning? So now he's asking, what because the master is saying, you have profoundly attained the meaning of the birthless. He's saying, what are you talking about? The birthless is birthless. What other meaning could there be? So the master said, if there is no meaning, who is it that discriminates? Nor is discrimination a meaning. So now it seems like the master is trying to add on layers upon layers on the labels, and the stranger is saying he's staying at the fundamental ground without adding further layers, and he's saying nor is discrimination a meaning as well. He's immediately cutting off that line of labeling. How excellent. So that is basically it. He is firmly planted in the fundamental principle, and he's not moving off that. Even though the master is trying to nudge him away from it, he's immediately returning and questioning. Okay, now the Chan master Zhi Huang first consulted the fifth patriarch and claimed that he had attained samadhi. Living in a hut, he devoted himself to lengthy sitting for 20 years. So when the master's principal Xuanzi was wandering through her show, he heard the Zhi Huang's fame and went to visit him in his hut. So Xuanzi asked, "What do you do here?" And Zhi Huang said, "I enter into samadhi." Xuanzi said, "When you say you enter into samadhi, does the mind of being enter, or does the mind of non-being enter? Because when you're talking about entering something, there must be a mind that is entering, right? So is the mind a mind of being or a mind of not being? If it is the mind of being that enters, then all insentient beings, if it is the mind of non-being that enters, then all insentient plants and rocks would be able to attain samadhi. If it is the mind of being that enters, then all sentient beings who have consciousness would also be able to attain samadhi." So Zhi Huang said, "When I have entered into samadhi, I am unaware of the existence of the mind of being and non-being." So Xuan said, "If you are unaware of the minds of being and non-being, then this is permanent samadhi, because this is implying that you are in a state of non-discrimination of being and non-being. So that means that your state of samadhi is permanent. But if your state is permanent, how can you enter it or come out of it? If there is entering and coming out, then it is not the great samadhi." So Zhi Huang did not respond. He realized that his misunderstanding has been pointed out. After a while, he asked, "From whom have you succeeded in this teaching?" Because he clearly illustrates a very strong level of understanding. Xuanzi said, "My master is the sixth patriarch of Chaoqi." So Zhi Huang said, "What does the sixth patriarch take as meditation?" So now he's clearly trying to gain clarity about meditation, because it seems like his understanding of meditation has not been entirely correct. Xuan said, "What our master preaches is the wondrously peaceful and perfectly quiescent. The essence and functions are such like. The five skandhas are fundamentally empty. The 6 types of sensory data are non-existent. One does not enter and come out of samadhi. One is neither concentrated nor disturbed. Meditation is in its nature non-abiding, and the serenity of meditation transcends abiding. Meditation in its nature is birthless, and the thoughts of meditation transcend birth. The mind is like space, but it is without any thinking of space." So this is very, 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 very profound. So when Zhi Huang heard this teaching, he came to visit the master. The master asked, "Where have you come?" And Zhi Huang related the previous events, and the master said, "Truly, it is as you have been told. You should only have your mind be like space, but don't become attached to the view that there is space." So it's to say, your mind should be like emptiness without attachment to the view of emptiness. Your mind should be unlimited without the attachment to the view of emptiness. Your functions should be unhindered, being without mind in both motion and stillness, The distinction between ordinary person and sage is forgotten. Subject and object are both destroyed. So here your functions should be unhindered. So the mind should not be hindered, should not be obstructed. So it should be free flowing, it should be effortless. Being without mind is in both motion and stillness. So when there is motion and stillness, there is the absence of mind. And the distinction between ordinary person and sage is forgotten. There is no discrimination between high and low when discerning sentient beings. And subject and object are both destroyed. Nature and characteristics are such like there is no time when one is not in samadhi. One text is without the 35 characters, beginning with "you should only," having merely. The master took pity on him for the distance he had come, and so clearly had his doubts for him. Cleared up his doubts for him. At this, Sir Huang experienced a great enlightenment. All that he had learned in the preceding 20 years had no impact whatsoever. That night, people north of the Yellow River heard a voice from the sky saying, Chan Master Zhi Huang has attained enlightenment today. Zhi Huang later took leave and returned to north of the Yellow River to teach the fourfold congregation. Okay, next encounter. A monk asked the master, what type of person attains the doctrine of Huang Mei? The master said, someone who understands the Buddha Dharma. The monk said, has your reverence attained it? And the master said, I don't understand the Buddha Dharma. So here the monk asked the master, who attained the doctrine of Huang Mei, which is the monastery where he attained the transmission to become the Sixth Patriarch. So he says, someone who understands the Buddha Dharma. So the monk further asked, has your reverence attained it? And he says, I don't understand the Buddha Dharma. This in itself is very profound. Because what there is to understand of the Buddha Dharma is a concept that is attached. So if someone says, I understand, then what the person is understanding is just a concept. And understanding a concept is not free from concepts. Okay, so one day the master wanted to wash the robe that had been bequeathed to him. Since there is no beautiful spring nearby, he went about 5 li behind the monastery, where he saw that the forest was lush and circulating with propitious energy. The master shook his staff and stood it upright on the ground, and a spring flowed forth where he pointed. The water collected into a pond, and Neng knelt to wash the robe. Suddenly there was a monk on the rock who came forth and bowed, saying, I am Fang Bian from Western Shu, Sichuan. Formerly I was in southern India, where a great master Bodhidharma enjoined me. Go quickly to China. I have transmitted the treasury of the eye to the correct Dharma, to the robe Samgati of Mahakyasapa. Mahakyasapa is the great disciple of the Buddha himself during the time of the Buddha, and that robe. So this is a monk that claims to have been transmitted the robe of Mahakyasapa. I have been transmitted through 6 generations and is at Kaoqi in Shaozhou. You should go and do obeisance to Hui Neng. I have come from afar and I would like to see the robe and bow transmitted from our master. So this is a practitioner from India that have come all this way, and he has a lineage all the way back to the great Bodhidharma. So he's asking to see the robe and bow. The master showed them to him, and Huinen asked further, "And what endeavor do you excel?" The monk said, "I am good at clay sculpture." The master composed himself and said, "You should try sculpting me." Fang Bian was unable to refuse, and after several days, the sculpture was finished. The likeness was 7 inches tall and thoroughly wonderful. The master laughed and said, "You only understand the nature of sculpture, but you don't understand the Buddha nature." the master reached out his hand and rubbed the top of Fang Bian's head, saying, "Long will you be a field of blessings for human beings." The master recompensed Fang Bian by giving him the robe. Fang Bian divided the robe into 3 parts. 1 part to cover the statue, 1 part to keep himself, and 1 part buried in the ground. He vowed, "In the future, he who will obtain this robe will be me appearing in the world. I will reside here and build new monastery halls." In the 8th year of the Jiayou period of the Song dynasty, a monk named Wei Xian built a hall on the site and dug into the ground, obtained the robe, which was still in new condition. The image is at Gaoquan Si. Those who prayed to it always receive a response. This is a phenomenal story, because what it's saying is that this man, at face value, he just seems like when Hui Neng asked him, "What endeavor do you excel?" he's just saying, "I'm good at clay sculpture." So then he was able to sculpt a clay sculpture of Hui Neng, and from that, Hui Neng said, you only understand the nature of sculpture, but you do not understand the Buddha nature. Long will you be a field of merit for blessings for humans and gods. My understanding of that is that he showed no interest in the Buddha Dharma, which is exactly what an enlightened person would be like. A person enlightened to the emptiness of the Buddha Dharma would realize that there is no practice to attach to. There is no Dharma to attach to. And this seems like exactly the case in this scenario. The master Fang Bian, or the clay sculptor Fang Bian, was at a level where he was not practicing or even talking or even endeavoring the Buddha Dharma. He had no interest in it, and he was only good at sculpturing. And then, because of this, the master recompensed him by giving him the robe, the bow and robe that was passed down from the Buddha himself all the way down to the 5th Patriarch, which gave it to Hui Neng. He gave the robe to Fang Bian. Fang Bian immediately divided it into 3 parts. He had no attachment to the robe itself, which shows a very, very high level of transcendence. A lot of people were trying to kill Hongren for the robe, and he was so unattached to the robe that he immediately divided it into 3 parts. He used one for such a mundane thing to cover the statue that was given to the Hui Neng. He put one on the statue to represent potentially that is like the insignificance of the robe, just to put it on the statue to return back to Hui Neng. One he kept for himself as representation of appreciation, because he appreciates the gesture of the present, that he keeps it to himself. And then the 3rd part, he buries it underground and he vows, "In the future, he who attains this robe will be me appearing in the world, and I will reside here building new monasteries." And that is exactly what happened. Several hundred years later, a monk named Wei Xian was known to have built the hall of the site and dug the ground. He obtained the robe. This is like a remarkable story, a remarkable historic occurrence. Okay, so the next one. A monk cited Chan Master Wulon verse, which goes, so this monk cited his verse, which goes, "Wulon has a technique by which one can eradicate the 100 thoughts. The mind non-activates with regard to the sensory realm, and body increases day by day." So hearing this, the master said, the author of this verse did not understand the mind ground. If you practice according to this, you will increase your fetters, which is increase your afflictions and delusions. He thereupon recited a verse which said, "Hui Neng is without technique. He does not eradicate the 100 thoughts. The mind is activated frequently with regards to the sensory realms, how could Bodhi increase? So this is what I'm talking again by saying that Hui Neng's mastery, Hui Neng's profundity in his understanding, every time it's highlighted, is only highlighted because it's countering another statement. But if he were to have initiated his own statement without any initiation or any provocation, then it would appear like he is creating a concept. But his concepts are always, it appears, a response to a pre-designed concept and bringing it back down to non-concept. But you can't have non-concept without a concept. So here, it's almost like Master Wulon did a great service to Hui Neng, because he presented him with a concept that he was able to take down back to non-concept, to then use it as a teaching of non-concept. Without this, there wouldn't be this. And so what he said was, Hui Neng is without techniques, because having a technique is a concept that you're attaching to, and being without technique means that you're practicing the practice of non-practice. He does not eradicate the 100 thoughts. He allows his mind to flow freely, and he does not eradicate or try to interfere with the mind. The mind is activated frequently with regard to the sensory realms, and this is a mind of pure freedom. You're allowing the mind free-flowing with the sensory realms. You're not imposing on it. You're not trying to restrict it. You're just allowing it to flow. How could Bodhi increase? And this is a very interesting rebuttal to the verse that says, and Bodhi increases day by day. If Bodhi is an instantaneous enlightenment at the value of realization, full realization, how can you attain full realization day by day? How can you attain it increasingly? You either have it or you don't, according to the interpretation of Hui Neng. And so this is the end of the Bodhi. This is the end of the Encounters chapter. Very, very long. I can't believe I did the whole thing. If you've stuck around to the end of this video, thank you so much. And if you like what you've seen, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or any suggestions or any comments regarding any of these encounters, which one was your favorite? Which one did you learn the most from? Which one did you have impacted you the most? Please leave a message in the comment section below. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next chapter. The next chapter is sudden and gradual. So now this one is a comparison between the teachings of Hui Neng and the teachings of Shen Zui. Hui Neng talks about the sudden teachings. Shen Zui talks about the arduous practice, which is more gradual in nature. This one shows a very clear distinction. And again, you can't have the sudden teaching without the gradual. So in a sense, it's like Shen Zui does Hui Neng a massive service, because without Shen Zui's gradual teaching, it would be impossible to have the sudden teaching, because sudden is only sudden in relative to gradual. Okay, so look forward to the next chapter, and I will see you again in the next episode. Maybe tomorrow, maybe today. See you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.